Okay, hello, this is Stephen Szabo. I'm the Executive Director of the Transatlantic Academy, and today we're holding a major conference on the state of the liberal order in Hungary. And I'm very pleased to have with us today József Szájer, who is a member of the European Parliament and one of the principal drafters of the new Hungarian Constitution. There's been a good deal of discussion about the Constitution, both within Hungary and within Europe and the United States, and it's a pleasure to have you here to talk a bit about it with us. May I ask you to start by talking a bit about why a new Constitution? You had a Constitution after 1989-90. Why did you feel the need for, or Hungary feel the need for a new Constitution?
Well, first, I think a document more important than the Constitution cannot be in a history of a nation. And Hungary is one of the longest constitutional tradition country in Europe. We have 1,000 years and sometimes very much in the vanguard of constitutional history. And Hungary, in addition to that, Hungary is the only country which didn't adopt a new constitution at the time of the transition to democracy. There has been a massive change, but for instance, give you just one example, the most important thing which is in every constitution is the beginning, not in the US because you had made it an amendment, but the basic rights in the modern constitutions are the first things. Mm-hmm. And in our constitution, which was a copy in 1949, the copy of the Stalinistic constitution, human rights were at the last chapter. And the structure, it has been heavily amended since 1949. The 1949 constitution was the symbol of the communist takeover, how to live with a constitution in the beginning of the 21st century, still bearing the name, even in not much more than the name of the 20th law of 1949. And I think it's a big debt. The Hungarian elites were not able to make and create the consensus for 22 years to create a new constitution. And the new two-third majority, which is required to adopt a new constitution, which has been basically given to the new government in 2010, decided that this old dream of having a new constitution, 22 years old dream, should come into force and create a new constitution, create a document which we can be proud of. You cannot be proud of a document which is self-contradictory, which numbering is bad, which content goes back to decades which were not associated with democracy.
If I could ask you very briefly just to point out what you think are the 2 or 3 most important changes or innovations in the new Constitution.
One is, which I have already mentioned, is that it should give a central right for rights, for the liberties of the citizen. We were basically using the 20 years history of Hungarian Constitutional Court jurisdiction, and in many very often we just transplanted the text, which has been already living constitutional law. The other source of inspiration was the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is a 21st century document, adding that many of the new generational rights of the future generations, environmental sustainability and other things are also there as an obligation from the present generations for the future generation. And the second point, which I would say is a symbolic, because the previous constitution, which was in force up to December 31, started with the sentence that until Hungary adopts a new constitution, and I'm quoting now, this temporary constitution will be the constitution. I think a country cannot live with a temporary constitution for decades. Mm-hmm. There is a time when you really have to draw the line and create documents like you. Very fortunate, I'm a great admirer of American constitutional history, but you have a Declaration of Independence, you have a constitution, you have your amendments, and this constitute the identity of your nation. Mm-hmm. Or the German Bundesverfassung, the German constitution is defining the modern German nation. Mm-hmm. And Hungary in 1990 missed this opportunity. So the preamble, which is quite long and speaks about the basic values, what are we Hungarians in the beginning of the 21st century, what are we going to do, what are our goals, what are our values, is a very important symbolic message to the society, which after the long disillusioned transition to democracy and failures of economy, failures of government, tries to give back citizens faith in the constitutionality, in the rights, in a good life which the Constitution enshrines. In that sense, it really transfers to every citizen of Hungary, every Hungarian, the message of rule of law, of constitutionality and rights.
Well, as you know, one of the reasons we're having this meeting today is because there's been a lot of concern in the U.S. and in Europe about the developments in Hungary. Concerns in the Constitution deal a little bit with the whole issue of the role of the Constitutional Court and the role of the judiciary. Why do you think there are these concerns here? I mean, do you feel that there's any justification or in these concerns, or how would you respond to those?
Well, I very often myself ask this question from myself, because sometimes countries which don't have a constitutional court criticize us for having a little bit less rights for the constitutional court than before. Sometimes the Germans ask us to tailor our judicial system or any constitutional system according to their taste. Sometimes the Americans say that it would be much better if you have our First Amendment or Fifth Amendment on the churches or on the freedom of speech in our way. But Hungary is a country of 1,000 years. If you go to the details, I myself or my colleagues, the Hungarian government, the Hungarian parliamentarians, can explain why did we change this or that. The reason for that was not creating a dictatorship. The reason for that after 22 years, after a lot of failures of building a functioning state, we had to change much. The new government got a huge and enormous constitutional majority because people were disillusioned from the solutions of the past. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to give big powers to solve and tackle the problems. And the new government is acting, and the constitution is not the principal element of that. It's the basis on which you build your policies, your other laws, but the constitution is the starting point. And obviously, with everything, you have to start from the ground, and when you have the solid ground, you can build on that. And that's what happened with the constitution. And many of the criticism, I wouldn't say that we didn't make mistakes or the government didn't make mistakes, but many of the criticism has been unfounded. And if you go a little bit farther, deeper into the question, you immediately see this is just a normal political debate which in every country exists, what to do with the homeless people, how to manage the judiciary, that the Budapest courts are not overloaded vis-a-vis the countryside court. These are all problems, and not to speak about social problems, economic problems, but this is just a foundation, and many of the criticism came not about the substance, but rather a criticism per se that this government has two-thirds majority. I'm sure that they will misuse it.
May I ask one last question, and that it goes back to your role and your thinking of this constitution, because I was wondering what your models were, because we don't have a lot of models in the Hungarian past for democratic constitutions. So when you were thinking about this, what did you look to for your model?
Well, in fact, your claim is not true, because Hungary is a very rich constitutional tradition. The religious tolerance was appearing in European constitutional history in the 16th century with the Torda Declaration in our historic constitution. Not to speak about that our Magna Carta, which is speaking about the freedom of firing the tyrant, comes only 7 years after the British Magna Carta, that the Hungarian nobles was fighting the right for fighting against dictatorship. I mean, translating to the present language.
Tradition then?
Yes, and in fact, this constitution, I mean, we had a gap because there was a Soviet constitution, the copy of the Stalinist constitution for 40 years in Hungary. The continuity, this rich continuity of the Hungarian historic constitution was cut in 1949. Which means that what we had to do now is to reestablish already on the modern grounds. And when I'm speaking about modern grounds, I speak about also a 21st century constitution, which is not only that written on a modern equipment like iPads and other things, but also about environmental sustainability, responsibility for future generations, and several elements, new checks and balances, for instance, against overburdening the state, making indebted. For a nation like Hungary, fiscal sustainability is a very important thing, because all generations of governments in the last 22 years has been spending the money of future generations. We built in, like many European countries are doing now as a rule, built in a break for being indebted and spending the money of the future.
Maybe you could get some advice to the United States on that last point. I don't
Well,
know.
I'm sure that after the criticism goes through, you will, and the Americans will study our constitution by its own merit, and maybe they will learn something from it.
Well, thank you very much for your interesting comments and for your participation in this workshop.